Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name's Jackie, and today I'm going to be starting a new series that we're going to be running throughout the rest of November and into December on corrections. So we're going to be running quite a few different topics, but we're going to be starting with customer corrections today. We will give you more information about the other upcoming topics towards the end of the session, but there will also be a link to register for future webinars in our follow-up email as well. Okay, so just to start off, we'll just do some housekeeping first of all. So first of all, your microphone will have been placed on mute. That just means you can't speak to the team directly today. So if you do have any questions, you are more than welcome to submit your questions across to us throughout the session. You don't need to wait till the end of the session to send your questions across. We have Matt and we've got Abby on in the background, ready and waiting to answer your questions. There is also a handout for today's session, so if you do want to take a copy of today's slides, then you can do so using the icon that looks like the document with the folded corner, and that will allow you to take a copy of the slides there. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at today is customer corrections. However, this does also mainly apply to suppliers as well, but it's easier for us to focus on one module. So everything we do today can be applied in your suppliers as well. So we're going to look at the corrections feature, and then we're going to run through some different scenarios showing you some manual corrections as well as the corrections feature. And then what we're going to do is look at the write-off, refund and returns wizard as well. So we're going to show you a few different options that you may have access to depending on your level of the software. And then at the end, we're going to come back for any questions that you may have. So if there's any outstanding at the end, we'll do a dedicated Q&A at the end. But like I say, if something's come to mind straight away, don't feel you need to wait till the end of the session today. Okay, so corrections are probably something we'll all have to tackle at some point. And as always with Sage, there's not only just one way of doing them. So we're going to look at the corrections feature first of all. And when I'm referring to the corrections feature, I'm referring to the options that are hosted within your transactions window. So those are the options to view, edit, unallocate, and to delete. So the first one, view, is quite self-explanatory. That allows us to view the posted details of the transaction. So what we can see here is a little bit more detail. You can delve a little bit further. You can see all of the posting information, but also what's very useful is if it's linked to any transactions or allocated, you can also see the allocations on there too. We have the edit option. And the edit option allows certain fields on a transaction to be edited. That might be restricted depending on how that transaction was originally posted, whether it's VAT reconciled, and if it's been something that's been generated automatically in the software. But like I say, if you can't edit it, it's possible that there is another option for you in terms of a manual correction. Next, we've got unallocate. So the unallocate option has been with us a few years now. Previously, prior to this feature arriving, if you needed to unallocate a transaction, so for example, an invoice and a credit that have been matched together, you needed to delete one of them and repost them. And that just become a little bit of a pain. So what we do now have is the option just to sever the link between the two transactions, but allowing those transactions to still remain live in the software so that they can then be reallocated elsewhere. The final option is the delete option. Okay, so this allows us to delete transactions if they're not VAT reconciled. And if they are VAT reconciled, then it will allow us to post a reversal. So again, we have had advancements in the last few years around corrections, which have made it far easier to make corrections in the software and then also account for that in terms of your VAT. Now, we do have a dedicated VAT session on VAT corrections. So if you want to know a little bit more on VAT corrections and be confident with VAT corrections, not only stay with us today, but check out that session. And we're also going to do one on the impacts on bank reconciliation and bank fees as well. So really common questions we get, we've identified that. We want to try and cover those in a separate session for you too. Okay, so just before I jump into the demonstration, I do just want to talk to you about two different types of fields on a transaction. So when you post a transaction, and at the moment I'm referring to something in the batch window. So if we were to do, for example, a batch customer invoice, we have a set of fields that we need to fill in. And some of those are termed critical fields and some of them are non-critical fields. So a critical field is a field that when we amend it, it means that we have to delete the original transaction and actually create a new transaction. And that's because it's something that's sort of really audit critical. So it tends to be things like the date, the amounts on the transaction, or it may be the customer or supplier reference that you're changing. We do have non-critical fields. So these tend to be the sort of text information or the details of the transaction. And you can amend these without having to reverse or cancel the original transaction. So that includes things like the reference, the actual details option, the department, payment reference, and your bank reconciliation flag. So you can amend these, it will make the amendment and it won't have any impact in terms of creating a new transaction. So that's the difference. That's why some transactions delete and create a new one, and that's why other transactions will just make the change that you've applied. Okay, so we're going to jump into a demonstration and I'm actually going to show you this in action so that you can actually see the difference between what we do when we delete a critical field and a non-critical field. But there is an article at the bottom there that's also quite handy if you're looking at your transactions and you're seeing statuses on there you're not sure of, then please do check out the link there for deleted and cancelled transactions. Okay, so I'm just going to go on to the next slide because I think there's just one more thing and I think it ties in very nicely with the question that's just come through there. So there are important considerations to be made. Okay, so if you're amending, editing, deleting a transaction that's been posted onto the ledgers from an invoice in the invoices and credits module, it is important to understand that that will not link back to the original invoice. Okay, so a quick question there is, can I edit an item, a line item, nominal code or department on a customer invoice that has been posted? You would need to amend the transaction, but it won't actually impact the original invoice. So it might be that you look at crediting the invoice and re-entering the invoice. So it is possible, but it's not as straightforward. So remember, if you delete a transaction in corrections, if it came from an invoice in the invoices and credits module, then it won't link back to that. That invoice will still sit there. Also, making corrections in this window will not have any impact on the stock module. So if you are correcting an invoice and it had stock and you need to adjust that stock, that will need to be a manual process done outside of this process we're going to show you today. And for that, we've got a dedicated session as well. If the transactions came from an order, so a purchase order or a sales order or a quotation, again, it won't impact those, it just amends the transactions. And deleted transactions will still show in your transactions window for audit purposes. So we do quite often get people say, can I just remove the red deleted transactions? But unfortunately not, they need to be there for audit purposes. Okay, so we're going to jump on to the demonstration now because we've got quite a few different scenarios to go through to try and make sure that we're covering as many bases as possible. We will refer to invoicing a little bit later on as well. Okay, so I'm going to pop onto the demonstration and take you into our corrections data set. So just want to show you the different options we've got here. So first of all, I'm going to go into transactions down the left-hand side. That's where we need to go for our corrections. And this is the list of all the transactions that we've posted in the software. So obviously, as you can see, mine's just a very small data set. So the four options I showed you earlier can be found up at the top here. So the first one I'm going to show you is the view option. So clicking on view takes us into a window here where we can see all of the posting details. So if it was a foreign transaction, we'd be able to see things like the exchange rate used. We've got the VAT reconciliation date if the transaction was VAT reconciled. But what we also have at the bottom, which is really useful, is the allocation. Apologies if I go on to the next window and click view. So if I click view and go into the next window, at the bottom we have the allocation there. So this shows me that this invoice number 10, which I'm just going to go back to, this invoice number 10, which is transaction 10 in my listing, has been allocated to a sales receipt. Sorry, the window's just opened on the other screen there. And it shows me it's been allocated to sales receipt number 11. So it's really handy to be able to see where that's been allocated to. So you might be thinking, actually, I don't think that invoice was paid off. Where can I find out what's paid that off so I can check if that's correct? And in this view option, we don't have the option to make any amendments. It's literally just letting us see all of the posting details on there. So that's the view option. Now the next one I'm going to show you is the edit option, but I am going to go through these in a bit more detail in just a moment. But the edit option allows me to edit certain fields. Okay, so I can't amend everything. I can't amend who made the posting. I can't change the date it was posted, but I can change things like the created on date. I can change the account reference, the due on date. You can also go into edit and go further into the transaction, which brings up the secondary window. And in here we can make some further amendments to things like the department and the net tax values, etc. So that's the edit feature. The delete option is quite straightforward. Highlight the item, go to delete. You can view all the details before clicking on delete. And then we have the unallocate option. So this allows you just to sever the link between those two. And I'm going to go through some examples of all of these. So don't worry, this isn't just a flying visit through these ones. So I'm going to say no at the moment because we'll come back to that in just a moment and show you how that works. So those are the 4 features that we're referring to. Okay, so I think I have about 9 examples to run through with you of different ways that we can use these correction features or the manual corrections. So the first one is to edit a transaction. Okay, so I'm going to edit a transaction, but I'm just going to refer back to those critical and non-critical fields. So I'm actually going to edit transaction 1 in my software. So I'm just going to highlight it so you can see it a bit clearer. This is a sales invoice. What I would like to do is edit a non-critical field on this one. So non-critical fields tend to be things like our details and our reference, but on this one, I'm going to amend the department reference. So it's currently posted to department 0. I'd quite like to post that to department 1. So I'm going to change that one over. So I'm going to use my edit option at the top. So I highlight the transaction, go into edit, and it's not on the initial screen. So if we click on edit again, that should take us deeper into the transaction. And you can see here, I've got the department option. So I'm just going to use the drop down to reassign that to department 1. Click on OK and close. And then I just need to be sure to click on save. Now it will ask if I want to post the changes. So we need to say yes here. And what you should be able to see is no additional transactions have appeared. We started with 21, we still have 21, but that original transaction now has department 1. So it's made the change without any other impacts on the data set at all. So that's because it was a non-critical field. So the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to amend transaction 2. But this time I'm going to look at a critical field, okay? And those tend to be the ones that are sort of numerical, so things like your date, your tax amount, your customer records, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the date on this transaction 2. So you can see at the moment this was posted on the 22nd of October. I'm going to change that to a different date. So I'm again just going to highlight it, and I'm going to go to edit, and I'm going to do it from this window here. So I don't need to edit again. I can do it from this window here. I can use the little calendar, and I'm just going to change that to the Friday before, so it's the 18th. Now again, I need to click save on here. Do I want to post the changes? We need to say yes. And what you may have just have seen if you saw it quick enough there was that we've got a brand new line. It's in red at the bottom, which has just appeared as a result of me changing the date on that transaction. So the original transaction is still there. And what it does have is the new date, which was the 18th of October. So that original transaction now has the correct posting details. What's happened though is we've actually gained an extra transaction down here, transaction 22, and this basically is keeping a record of the original posting details of that transaction. So you can see there it's in red, so that means it's deleted, but it also has in the details deleted C transaction 2, so it does link back to that original transaction so that you can see what has changed. You could put them sort of next to each other and analyze how those transactions are different from one another. So the only thing that's changed is the date on there. So that is editing a transaction, some simple editing on the transactions there. Now it might be that you need to delete a transaction. Okay, now deleting a transaction, if it's not VAT reconciled, is quite straightforward. You click on delete, it will delete the transaction. However, if you have VAT reconciled it, that's where things are slightly different. No trickier, but just slightly different. So I'm going to have a look at transaction 4 for this one. So I'm going to highlight that in my list. And we have a sales invoice, and it was from September. The key column I want to highlight here is the VAT reconciliation column. Okay, so it's been included in VAT return number 1, and it has a VAT reconciliation date, which is the end of September. So that means I have declared this invoice to HMRC. So if I make any amendments to to this transaction, I need to inform HMRC about this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this one. So I'm just going to highlight it, go to delete, select delete, and then I get the message, do you wish to reverse this transaction? So because it's VAT reconciled, it cannot delete it, but what it will do is it will post a reversal. It will post the opposite transaction for me. So the opposite of a sales invoice is a sales credit. So it's going to post a sales credit note for me to counteract what was originally posted. Now, in the past, we have had to do these manually, okay? But the software now, where possible, will try and post the reversal for you. You might still find extreme circumstances where you need to do a manual reversal, and we're going to come on to that in a little bit's time. So I'm just going to say yes to reverse the transaction. And again, if you look at the bottom of my transaction list, we're starting to add new transactions on here. So the original transaction is still live. It's not showing in red. It's a live transaction. But what it does have is in the reference, it has the word cancel. So that means that that has sort of effectively been cancelled off. So it's live, but it's been reversed. And you can link that by looking at the reversal here. So we've got a sales credit, which has been posted. We've got in the details cancel C transaction 4, and again, it's got cancel in the reference there. So if you match these up together, they would cancel one another out. Now, what would happen is when you do your next VAT return, this would pop up in the previously unreconciled transactions, and it'd be one that you would need to include on the next return to correct your VAT figures for HMRC. So don't ever ignore these ones because they're trying to make a correction on your behalf. Okay, so that is deleting. Okay, and that's deleting when is VAT reconciled. So the next one I'm just going to show you there is that unallocate feature that I mentioned earlier. So this is the way of severing that link between two transactions that have been allocated together. So it might be that you've had an invoice and you've allocated it against the credit. It's maybe been the wrong credit, or it might be a payment. So customer might have sent you a payment to an invoice and you've allocated to the wrong invoice. You want to stop it being allocated to that invoice so you can actually allocate it elsewhere. So no more deleting transactions. We can use this unallocate option. Now, if you just take a quick look at where I am at the moment, I'm at the very bottom of my transaction list and I'm sitting here on this credit note. Now at the top, we look at the unallocate option, that's currently grayed out. Okay, so this option will be grayed out if we're sitting on a transaction that doesn't need reconciliation, because it's not allocated. So in this case, it's not allocated at the moment, or because that transaction type doesn't need allocation. So it might be that it's a journal or something like that. We can't unallocate those. Okay, so if it's grayed out, there's normally a reason why. However, if I pop my mouse onto transaction 5, and if we just go into view, and I'll view again, and within here, in allocations, you can see that this particular one has been allocated to sales receipt number 6. Okay, now we've decided that that was the wrong one to allocate it to. It was a different sales receipt that we need to allocate it to. So I need to sever the link between these two transactions here. So I'm just going to use that unallocate option. Do I want to use that? Yes, I do. And what that does then is it changes the sales receipt, which was transaction 6, from an SR to an SA, so indicating that it's a payment on account. So that has now changed to a payment on account. And if we go back into view on transaction 5, back into view again, you can see the original transaction allocation shows there, but it shows as cancelled. So it's no longer actually allocated to that transaction. Okay, so that is the unallocate option. Like I said, that makes it miles easier than when I was back on technical support, because we had to pick which one's going to have the least impact, the invoice or the payment, and delete that transaction and reinstate it. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's not as simple as that, because not everyone allocates one transaction to one other transaction. So it could get quite complicated, these unallocations. So that should hopefully make your life a lot easier if you're using that one. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit more complicated now. And like I say, this links into some of the questions we've had there around invoicing. So I'm going to go into invoices and credits. And I just want to show you these here. So I've got 2 invoices, one of which is actually the one I'm going to demonstrate here. So I've got an invoice. This invoice, if we look at the invoice, had stock on it. Apologies, everything seems to be opening on the wrong window today. We've got an invoice there. It's had a product on it, okay? And when we look at the posted column, it's saying yes. So essentially this invoice is complete. That means that the invoice has been posted onto my transactions window. It has updated my ledgers, so it's impacting things like my VAT return and my customers, but also that stock has now gone out of stock. Okay, so I've taken that item out of my stock and I've actually given it to the customer. So it's in a status of complete. Now what that has done in our transactions window is that it has posted an invoice for me, and it's posted invoice number 7 with product number 1 on there. So this is where people do tend to go a little bit wrong. They will delete the invoice from here, not realizing it doesn't do anything else other than that. Okay, so we'll delete it from VAT return. it will delete it from my customer record, but it doesn't do anything to the stock. Okay. Now, we are doing a full session on correcting invoices and orders, and it's not a session we've done before. Okay, so if you are impacted by this, please do get yourself registered for that session, because we've identified there was a bit of a gap there in what we're covering. So we wanted to go into more detail on this. So if I delete this invoice, which I'm just going to show you now, just delete number 7 and delete. It's deleted from here, so you can see the deleted SI. If we go back to invoices and credits, that invoice is still there. If we look in the product and into the activity on the product, that transaction is still there. So we've still moved an item out of stock. Okay, so if you are using the invoices and credits feature and you need to delete a transaction, but you want the stock correction and the invoice correction as well, we recommend going down the manual reversal using the credit option. So you can create a credit note here and just match what the original invoice said, or on some versions, standard and professional, you do have the option to credit invoice. And what that will do is if you highlight an invoice, go to credit invoice, it will post exact opposite of what the original invoice was for you. And when you update that to ledgers, it will reverse the original invoice, it will post a new transaction, which is a credit note, and it will also do a goods returned for any stock movements too. So that's an option. You can also do a manual adjustment of stock, and that's what we'll be covering later on this month when we do that session. But that one there was just to really sort of hit it home there that making the correction in transactions doesn't impact any other module. Okay, so that's the invoicing feature. Okay, so we're going to pop back to the slides for a moment because that is the corrections feature. But like I say, if none of those are working for you, we still have the ability to do manual corrections. So essentially, if you're going to do a manual correction, you need to find the opposite of what you've originally posted. So if you're trying to reverse an invoice, you would do that with a credit note. If you're trying to reverse a credit note, you would do that with an invoice. So what I've done on these 2 slides is I've literally given you a table to show you what transactions reverse what, so that if you do find yourself in this situation, then you do have something that's going to be to hand to help you sort of navigate that situation. So I've done it for both customers and suppliers. Okay, so you can see what reverses what. So again, I've got a scenario here for you. Okay, and this is where we've got a fully paid invoice. And I'm just going to go back a slide because I'm going to do this on customers for you. So imagine you have done a fully paid invoice. You've got a sales invoice and it's been paid off with a sales receipt. What do we do to reverse that? So the first thing to remember is we're reversing, in this case, 2 transactions. So to reverse 2 transactions, we need to post 2 transactions. Okay, so quite often where this goes wrong is where someone will post a credit note and that's it, and then they'll wonder why a balance is left behind. So I am just going to do an example of this. I'm just referencing which customer popped this on for you so I can double check this for you. So let's pop back to the slide, the data. I'm going to go into my transactions. And it was customer 5, so transactions 8 and 9. So we've got here a sales invoice for the customer, which was on the 12th of the 11th, and then they paid. Okay, now for some reason we need to do a credit note and refund that customer. So it could be that there was goods returned, the items were no longer needed, so we need to do a reversal of that. Now, like I say, if the options are there for you, if they've come from invoices and credits, then use the credit feature where possible. So this is just a scenario that what if you can't use that option? Okay, so what we're going to do then is we're going to have to reverse both of these. We don't just do a credit note, because if they want the refund too, we need to show the refund going to the customer and the money leaving our bank account also. So we need to do a sales invoice first of all. So the sales invoice was for 340 plus VAT, and it was yesterday's date, and the payment was today. So I'm going to go into customer 5, or I'm going to select customer 5. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to credit off that invoice. So I'm going to go into batch credit, and I'm going to match the posting details of that original transaction. Now, when I entered this, I kept everything simple. I didn't make any changes other than the amounts. So we're just going to post that credit note to reverse the invoice first and save. But what that's done now is it's taken us into a negative balance. So we now need to post the other transaction to reverse that sales receipt. And this is where we use the customer refund option. So again, I've got the customer highlighted. We've got the options along the top. I'm looking for the refund option. And this looks a little bit similar to the batch entry window. So I'm just going to find my customer 5, and it's located my sales credit note, and I'm just going to pay that in full. Now, if I was just doing a partial refund, I could type the amount that I'm refunding here. But I'm going to refund in full and then save. That's taken us back to 0. So what that's done is post 2 transactions to reverse the original 2 transactions. So if we have a quick look at the activity, it's probably easier to see this in the activity. You can see there, we've got the original sales invoice, which has been reversed by the credit note. We've then got the sales receipt, and then we've got the sales payment, which is reversing that. Now, a quick question there about 0 amount invoices. Is it still better to credit rather than delete? So a 0 value invoice won't have actually posted anything to your ledgers. Okay, so if you've got an invoice on your invoice list, which is a 0 value invoice, that won't have posted any transactions. So you're probably best to credit that one, because you won't be able to find anything in your transactions listing. Another quick question there is, can you change a bank payment to a bank receipt without having to delete the initial transaction? I'll come back to that one in a moment. I'll demonstrate that one for you. So just leave that one with me and we'll show you how that works. Okay, so that was manual correction. So just working out what is the opposite of the transaction I've just posted, or the one I want to correct, and then posting that transaction. Okay, so back to the slides, because what we're next going to talk about is the write-off refund wizard. Now, this is only recommended if you're using the standard VAT feature, which tends to be a large portion of our customers. And this write-off refund wizard kind of allows you to do some of the things I've shown you already, but it gives you a wizard that walks you through step by step. But it also does have some features that you can do manually, but you wouldn't necessarily have sort of thought that you were doing that. So I'll not allude to it any further. We'll talk about that. So the pros of using this write-off refund wizard is that it's automatic. Okay, so when you do a write-off or a refund using the wizard, it's automatic for you. All of the posting details are entered automatically for you. So it does make life a bit quicker and a bit easier. It's not as widely used though. The cons are it's only full value. So if you're doing an invoice refund, you can only do a full value on this. So you can't do a partial refund, and you can't use it for foreign transactions either. So there are definitely reasons why customers wouldn't be using it. But as you can see there, it's giving us a few things it can walk us through. So if you're not yet confident with the software and manual adjustments, this wizard sort of helps instill that confidence that you're doing the right thing, talks you through step by step. Now there are 8 options on here. I'd love to go through all 8 options for you today. Unfortunately, we wouldn't have time. So I'm going to show you a few of these different options, but not all of them. So this is where I would recommend, if you wanted to try these out, to have a look and see how they work. You do have access to demonstration data. You'll not break your own data, just our demonstration data will do all the practicing. You do also have the option to restore a backup into your practice data if you're using version 30.1. So there are alternatives for you if you want to give this a go, but not on your live data. So these are all the options that it can do for you. So I've popped this on the slides onto the handout for you with a little explanation of all of them, because there's 8 options and it just lists what they are. It doesn't exactly explain what it's going to do and what it's going to post for you. So again, I'm going to do some demonstrations on this and show you first of all where you can find this feature. So this feature is at the top of your customers option, so write-off and returns, and like I say, it just talks you through the wizard there. So the first one I'm going to show you is the top one, customer invoice refunds. So we've already done some customer invoice refunds. I showed you how you could do that using the credit option in invoices, and I've also just shown you how you can do that manually. But what I'm going to do now is show you how you can use the wizard to do that. So I have a customer 6, where that invoice has been paid off in full. So just to show you before, just exit out of there. We have a look at customer 6 at the moment. In their activity, they've got an invoice, and that has been paid off by a sales receipt, and somebody has just picked up on a typo that I've popped in. I think I was maybe at the end of saying write off, and I've just lost track of what I was up to. So thank you for pointing that out. It's always good to get some feedback so I can make some amendments on there. So do appreciate that. So we've got a sales invoice and a sales receipt there. So what we want to do is we want to do a refund on this invoice. So I'm going to close off of there. I'm going to go into this one, and I'm going to select the account. So it's customer 6, and then we go into the next window. So if we had a list of invoices that were paid off, then we would be able to pick which one we wanted to reverse. So I've only got one, so I just need to make sure I highlight that and then make sure it's going through the right bank account. So I'm just going to select my 1200 bank account and next, and then it's just asking for the date, so we can change the date, but notice it didn't give me any options for part refunds or anything like that. And if you wanted to pop a reference in, you can do too. And it's going to show you what it's going to post, and at the click of a button, I'm going to click post. If we go into the transactions list, you can see there my 2 new transactions for customer 6 are the sales credit note and the sales payment there. And you can see in the reference, it's quite clearly labeled them with refund, okay? And that just makes it easier to track when you're using this. So that is the refund invoice option. The next one I'm going to show you is if a customer's overpaid. So a customer might have overpaid, or they might have sent you a deposit and they've actually asked for that to be returned. It might be that the order isn't going ahead. So customer 7 here has actually paid in advance £1,200. As you can see there, payment on account, and we're going to refund that one next using the wizard. So I'm going to go into write-off and returns, and I'm going to use the payment on account refund. So again, I'm going to choose my customer 7. And again, if I had a series of overpayments, I'd have a list to choose from here. So I'm just going to select this one. It's the only one there. I'm going to choose my bank account, 1200, and next. Again, I can change posting details if I need to do so, and then post. Again, if we pop back to the transactions, you can see there It's just done a refund. So just a singular transaction this time because it was only one transaction initially, that payment on account. So the sales payment is the transaction we've used to reverse that. Okay, the final one I'm going to show you is the option for one of the write-off features. Okay, so you can write off entire customer accounts, you can write off certain transactions, and you can write off transactions that are maybe under a certain value or if you've made overpayments. So we are going to use the option for overpayments. So what I just want to show you first is customer rate, their activity beforehand. So we'll go into activity. What you can see is we've actually got an overpayment of about £5.50. So it might just come to the end of the year, you've got very, very small balances and you just want to write those off. So we can use the write-off refund wizard to do that. So what I'd like to do is just take this customer back to zero. And it might be that these are really, really old transactions. I'm never really going to receive those payments or send those payments to the customer. So it might just be that we've got to that point that we just need to clear them out. So I'm not saying you should just wipe balances off for no reason, especially not if they were just posted yesterday. But once you've got to a point where you think, this isn't going to go any further. So I'm going to go into write-off and refund, and I'm going to use the small overpayments option. And I'm going to pop in the value. I'm going to say £5. You could pick the value here. And click on next, and here are my overpayments. So a quick question's come through there. How would you write off a bad debt? So this is very similar. Okay, so you can write off transactions to bad debt. This is also going to use the bad debt nominal code as well. Despite this being an overpayment, it's a very similar process to writing off debt as well. So you can use the window. In fact, I'll go back. You could use the option to write off customer transactions to do that. You can write off transactions. It's reclaiming the VAT. There are certain VAT implications on that. Now, what I would say again is we have got sessions dedicated to bad debt write-off and also reclaiming the VAT. So have a look on our recordings page because we have covered that session and also about the criteria around reclaiming the VAT. Okay, so, and I think someone just mentioned you can't write off unless over 6 years old. So yeah, it's only once they meet a threshold that you are happy to write off these overpayments. So like I say, these could be years and years old, not posted yesterday. So I've popped in £5 and I'm just going to say next here, and it's just picked up my overpayments. So I've got some very small overpayments and I am going to select all of these. So I've got all 3 of these selected. And then I'm going to click on next. So if you had some that you didn't want to include, you would just deselect them. So I'm going to click on next. Again, it's asking me for reference. So I'm just going to pop in write off and next, and then we'll post. So just to show you, so it's quite similar to writing off a bad debt. It will post transactions using the 8100 nominal code by default, and that is our bad debt write-off nominal code. So if you did have an invoice that you needed to write off, you would normally post a credit note to 8100 and that would write the balance off for you. However, you can also use the wizard, and as you can see there, it's used that 8100 code automatically. So I haven't had to consider my nominal code that I needed to use. It's automatically posted using those details for me. So when I look at customer rate now, you can see the balance is back down to 0 there. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the session. We're pretty much bang on time there. There's always so much to show you on this session. So I'm just going to quickly run into our summary there. So if you do have any questions, please do get them across. We've got Matt still hanging on the background, so please do get that across to us. Okay, so first of all, transactions can be corrected in the transactions window. If a transaction can't be deleted, it can still be reversed. We've got that unallocate option, and that allows us to sever the link between the two transactions. And the write-off refund wizard can be used if you need to post write-offs or write-off accounts that meet certain criteria. Just remember, none of the options we've talked about today will impact the invoices and credits module. You would have to do those manually as a separate process. And then all features mentioned today are similar in the suppliers module. So I mentioned at the beginning, so all of this can be applied to suppliers as well. Okay, so there was a question earlier, so please do get your final questions across, but there was a question earlier that I said I'd come back to. Do not worry, I have not forgotten. It was, can you change a bank payment to a bank receipt without having to delete the initial transaction? So let's show you this one. So I'm going to quickly throw on a bank payment. Just pop some basic details down. So I want to just demonstrate the sort of limitations with this. Apologies if I've got the wrong nominal codes here, just trying to quickly. Okay, so we've got a quick bank payment that's being posted on there. Okay, so in transactions, I can find that transaction there. If I go into edit, what I wanted to just show you there is there's no place to actually change the transaction type. Okay, so we can't change an invoice into a credit. We can't change a bank payment into a bank receipt, unfortunately. So we don't have the option in either of these windows to change that transaction type. So unfortunately, back to your original question, you would need to delete the original and a new one would need to be posted in that case. Okay, some questions there around sort of bad debt. I would recommend joining that recording. So there's a recording on bad debt that shows you how to write off bad debt both manually and using the wizard, but it also goes through VAT and VAT submission as well. So please do check out that recording. The link will be in your follow-up email today because we've got a dedicated 45-minute webinar on that one for you. Okay, just looking at the questions there. Okay, there's a quite long question here that I'm just going to try and sort of summarize here. Is there a way of doing a debit or credit journal on a supplier or customer account? Unfortunately not. Journals are only for movements between nominal codes. So what you might need to do is find a sort of another workaround. There will be a transaction you can do to reverse what you've done, but unfortunately there isn't a sort of journal option that allows you to impact the customer or supplier. Just because you're saying that you've done a correction, it's gone to the wrong account, I probably recommend just giving our technical support team a call just so we can sort of map out the transactions that have been posted so far and then work out what's the best solution for you. But unfortunately, journals can't be posted to customer or supplier records. There's a quick one there. Is there a way to correct an item dispatched in error? Unfortunately, I'm thinking referring to the purchase order module. Unfortunately not. There isn't a sort of easy undo option. You would need to reverse everything out and then start again. Again, we will be covering that on our session around invoices and orders, which I think is early December or maybe later this month. So maybe have a look out for that session because we're going to try and do some different examples, but there isn't a quick fix, unfortunately. It's normally reversing what you've done and then popping everything back on again live. Okay, I think we are on top of the questions. I just want to remind you before we go that we have got absolutely loads of webinars going on over the next 2 months. We're not resting at all during December. So we've got corrections ongoing. Timely, I've just landed on the corrections of invoicing orders there on the 3rd of December. So there is one there. So if you go to sage.co.uk/webinars, okay, you can access all of our upcoming webinars and you can see all of the different sessions that we're doing. So we're continuing the corrections theme tomorrow. We're looking at journal corrections. So if you want to learn a bit more about journal corrections, something that does sort of stress people out, then do join us for that session tomorrow morning. But we do have our usual sessions on things like the VAT return, we've got stock corrections, we've got VAT reconciliation, and we will be running our festive themed webinars also. So things that you maybe only do at the end of the year. So tidying up your data, reaching out to your customers, keeping your customers happy over that customer period. So please do have a look, get yourself registered for those sessions, and in the new year, keep an eye out for the next badge. We'll be hopefully doing that in February time on banking. Okay, so another one very quick question there. If you post a bank receipt to a suspense account because you don't know where it came from, can you post direct from suspense to a customer account? So that's where you'd be looking at doing things like the opposite transaction. So if it was originally a bank receipt, then you might want to do a bank payment. With regards to posting that to a customer account, that's where it becomes a little bit trickier. So you might need to reverse it out and then reverse the original transaction out and put on a new transaction once you do recognize where that transaction's come from. So yeah, transactions can be used to hold things temporarily and then just reverse those out. Okay, I think we're going to look to end the session there, just slightly over today. It's always a busy session, this one, because there's lots of different examples to show you. So yeah, we are back tomorrow. So please, in fact, we're back this afternoon with bank feeds. So please do join one of our sessions in the near future, and we'll hope to see you very soon.